back with Nate Brakeley again to touch base on all things USA rugby. So, Nate, we are going to look back on Scotland and Romania and how those went for the US. Obviously, let's do it in order of how they played out. So, obviously, we had that Romania fixture, which was really interesting. Just from an outside perspective, the US really looked on top in terms of all the stat sheets and the way things were going throughout the match, but obviously, kind of Romania snuck it in the end. What was your sort of overall takeaway from the fixture, and where do you think the match was sort of won by the Romanians or perhaps lost by the US?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Romania, if you look at the history we've had there, the losses we've had have been when we've let them drag us into these kind of hard attritional kind of set piece nip and tuck games. And the ones that we've gone well is when we've kind of said no to that and played our own game plan. And we've been solid at set piece, but then we've run around the park in a way that they couldn't keep up with. And I think again that was the pattern in when we played them in October was we saw, or whenever that was,
Yeah,
August.
well, that's October,
Um,
yeah, wasn't it? Yeah.
that we were able to dominate the free flowing part of the game. And then, we squared up at set piece, but just enough to keep them out of that part of the game. And, slick ball probably, but the open field stuff wasn't coming off. And then we just did not front up in the same way that we have historically in some of that set piece opportunity. So our maul couldn't get going, which should be a weapon that close to the goal line as we got. And they were doing great work around the ruck to manufacture some of those tries that they got.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because I mean, again, that fixture sort of played out exactly as you've just said there. Obviously, the US looked to make all of the play, but that set piece is letting them down a little bit at the moment, which is really interesting. So I guess it's a big work on going into the Pacific Nations Cup with the teams they're coming up against there. I guess you're less likely to come up against any sort of heavy hitters there. I guess all of the teams in that competition want to play more of a free flowing rugby generally. So just looking at the Scotland game, I mean, Scotland have obviously, I think essentially all of their matches this summer have played out in a similar sort of pattern. They kind of just eventually overpower the opposition. So I guess for the US, that's sort of a benchmark to work towards more so even than the Romania game, because that Romania game was so nip and tuck. And as you've pinpointed, those are areas the US can fix relatively quickly, you would have thought. But that Scotland game, was that sort of a shock, the distance between the two sides, or did you kind of feel it might be coming that way?
No, I don't think it was so much of a shock as, it was pretty obvious that their maul was decimating us, that they had what, three maul tries or at least tries off the back of maul pens, and USA mistakes let them kick into that corner and start that maul again.
Mhm.
And I think that's when you look at tier one teams, they don't get bored with just scoring tries boring ways. That they scored one maul try and said, right, that was easy. Every opportunity we get, we're going to maul for a pen or a try, and they were successful. And the boys couldn't find a way to match that. And if you look at the around the rest of the park, like the physicality that USA showed was a massive step change from the week before. So they clearly got the message in camp. The scrum was actually super encouraging. We got a penalty even when David Anu was off with the yellow card. So that was two domestic props pushing back if not first choice, high choice Scotland scrum. And so to be able to have the scrum not be a liability against a tier one nation is fantastic. And that's exactly what you want. And that's the maul is much easier to shore up than a scrum. And so I think that if we can fix that maul and then bring that physicality, Connor Mooneyham was fantastic in his start in the wing, shut down that the wingers from Scotland that everyone was worried about, that we're going to go off and score five tries or whatever. And I think that there's a lot of positives to take out of there. That being said, whatever it was, 40-7 moral victory is not one you want. But that game concerned me a lot less than the Romanian one.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. I mean, again, the stats bear out exactly like you said there. I mean, the US scrum was on top really, which was fantastic to see, and like you said, tying up the mauls. I guess in terms of from a coaching perspective, How pleasing is it to see that, in a week that Scott and his coaching staff can kind of implement where they went wrong, which, it sounds so basic, but you see it week in, week out at the top level that a lot of teams struggle to reassess. So to be able to do that in a week, I guess, speaks a lot volumes of what Scott's coaching team can do.
It's certainly encouraging, and I think that we'd be remiss also to overlook player leadership that often drives a lot of that as well. I can guarantee that all the points that were on the slides in week 2 were also there in week 1. It just takes buy-in to those.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that will be player driven by a lot of the senior leaders that are still around. But I think the other side of that is that the reality is that as an American rugby player for the Eagles, you're going to run into a ton of scenarios where you genuinely only do have that 1 week, and this was even a shorter week, to assemble and get together. And so if your first week every time is a throwaway where you need to get your feet back under you, like that's not a sustainable model. And I know Scott's trying to get more time in camp so that we can avoid some of those issues. But the real challenge here is not necessarily how do we coach these guys to play rugby. It's how do we hit the ground running from when we last assembled 4 months ago. And oh, by the way, we have a tier 1 test in 5 days. Like, how do we ramp up quickly enough such that we're going to play the best brand of American rugby on short notice, which is a huge challenge.
Yeah, no doubt. And I guess that kind of leads us to the Pacific Nation Cup. So first up is Canada, which is an interesting one because obviously, they had a similar sort of outing. Perhaps I would argue they struggled more against Scotland than the US did for sure. How do you see that one playing out? And again, is that sort of, you talked about obviously the US want to play more of a free-flowing game against teams like Romania and things like that. Would you take it more set piece against Canada, or would you still want to play that looser game?
I think playing to your opposition is generally a recipe for disaster, especially if it's kind of the antithesis of what you're trying to implement in the first place. Before these past couple of tests, I would have said Canada is not the one I'm concerned about, and I said that I would expect us to beat them. They mauled very well against Scotland, which is very concerning given our go out against Scotland. Scotland carved them up in the loose, which again, there's that opportunity for USA to play the way that we'd like to. But again, if that set piece doesn't come around, we're going to be in for a long day where Canada, again, is very comfortable, milking some penalties. They got plenty of guys that can get over the ball and kicking it to the corner and then turning it into a set piece match. And there's a reason why the Free Jacks are in the semifinal. That's pretty much the Canada pack, plus or minus a few guys. And they, again, are very comfortable kicking to the corner and mauling and playing a very forward-heavy rugby style. So they're going to be well drilled and well practiced and with their tails up on the back of that Romania match. And so USA is going to have to take that match at full face value and get excited to get stuck in. And as a side note there, it's thrilling that we finally that border rivalry is back to full flame, because there were a few years there where we should be, that iron sharpens iron. We should be beating the hell out of each other. Pretty much every tour is a free match where we don't have to travel too much. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I guess that is sort of, I guess, shows that the MLR is paying dividends for both countries, right? I mean, even with the Canadian clubs going under, it still shows that having the having the Canadian players in there and getting that rivalry back, like you said, is so important. I mean, that's what the Six Nations thrives on, for example. It's just that close rivalry with your neighbors. I guess for the next fixture for the US with Japan under Eddie Jones, obviously, life hasn't started that well for Eddie in Japan. And I guess from a US perspective, now's the time to kind of get Japan and really show that the gap has closed between the two nations, which will be really interesting. You talk about, fast and loose. That's sort of the way that the Japanese want to play anyway. So like you said, you don't really want to adjust too much for your opponent. So it could be a high scoring thriller in that one. How do you see that one playing out?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think that's going to be a great matchup for us to see how we play that style against a team that wants to play the same way. Scott is huge on fitness and physicality, and that goes to the rest of his staff there, but also that strike hard and early and then play what's on offer. And in Japan, it excels at that as well. And so it's going to be a battle of who can pull that off more and probably also make fewer mistakes that it can turn into a high risk play style. And if the conditions dictate it, It is going to come down to, who makes mistakes possibly versus who's creating more. But I do agree that it's a team that has lost a little bit of their identity, or at least a little bit of their execution. And so whereas Japan of the past 5 years was knocking on that tier one door, like I think that's a good opportunity for us to take it to them.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how Eddie, I mean, molds that team over the next sort of 3, 4 years. I mean, there's certainly players there, but I guess they've had a golden generation for a decade plus, really, when you look at the Michael Leach and players like that, which is really interesting. So I guess in terms of summing that up, because we'll definitely be touching base closer to the time again. For the US, if you were to give them three major points to work on, I know the mold's been a recurring theme here. Maybe in order of sort of 3 to 1 of importance, where would you see the US needs to really focus heading into the PNC?
Yeah, so the mall is an obvious one. The mistakes to allow the other teams into the game, I think, needs to be cut out, which is a pretty, can be a very straightforward one. It can also be an insidious one. It's like, all right, you're a good fetcher. How do we coach you such that you're still going for those balls that you should be able to get, but not also giving away the dumb penalties. And then I think the other piece is there's, against a team like Scotland with very good defense, we were having trouble manufacturing kind of opportunities where it was we would kind of end up where we're kind of running aimlessly and not necessarily creating too much that's a different look for them. I think that with the way that Scott wants to play defense, we shouldn't be afraid to put the ball behind them and then get back on top that way versus running into a brick wall over and over. So I would say, to summarize again, that's mauls, that's cut out the stupid stuff, and then that's play what's on offer, even if sometimes that means kick the ball away and play aggressive defense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just wanted to get one bonus question in before, just because you brought it up there quite interestingly. With in terms of the jackal, it's kind of become apparent that they want to go away from putting players in those risky positions in terms of the jackal, in terms of the law implications and things like that. Does that in a way suit a team like the US who have phenomenal athletes in terms of that counter rucking, as opposed to needing one or two specialist sort of turnover merchants? I'd be really interested to see your view on that, because it's been much discussed, and I guess the biggest sort of one, I guess the series that highlighted the changes the most was Ireland, South Africa. The ruck looked to be a bit of a mess, just player bodies flying in and things like that. How much scope is there for a team like the US with the athletes that you've got to really get on top of the likes of Canada and Japan, just because they're the next two opponents coming up?
Yeah, I think that it's always a question, and everyone's doing one thing, and then finally somebody figures out how to interpret the rules to their benefit, and that turns into what everyone starts doing. I think that the way that it's interesting because it seems like they're trying to play more attacking rugby, but they've also ruled out the crocodile roll, which makes that if you can withstand that official charge, there's not really a second tool in the toolbox for people to remove the jackler. Which means that as a coach, if I'm coaching people, you are trying to blow people playing through, possibly leaving the ball exposed. That just means you have to play that much faster. But there's a lot less emphasis on get over the ball and set in place, and it's much more blow through and just play fast on top of everything, such that they can't turn that ruck into a mess. And so I think, again, that's the way that they're coaching at the US, and I think that is going to play well, at least for the refs' interpretation, is that they're going to give the folks cleaning out a little bit more leeway to drive past the ruck, to come in a bit from the side. If that means that contact point with the defender looks a little bit cleaner and isn't turning into a roll or a twist or a fall on top of each other. That being said, it also, again, leaves opportunity for the ball to squirt out and for all that to happen. I think as a fetcher, you need to have all the tools in your toolbox, and I think people are usually pretty hesitant to go to the counter ruck as a first option, unless you see that kind of on the kick chaser in the trams a bit. But yeah, I think that if we start doing that more, at the very least, to slow ball down, that if you can force the offense to commit an extra guy to get you out of there because you're just trying to counter ruck versus trying to get hands in, I think you're going to get a lot more leeway with the referee to slow that down a little bit more without getting a penalty if you're just trying to counter ruck. You know, as soon as you put hands on, then now it's in the ref's hands to do as he pleases or as he sees. But that counter ruck, you're going to paint the right pictures for the referee.
Yeah, no, really interesting, Nate, and that's why I love chatting to you, mate. Thank you so much. So US going 2 from 2 in the round robin stage.
I'm going to give it to him.
There you
Get
go.
it back to the boys.
Got it back to the boys.
But you know, both of them are winnable. And as I said the last time we chatted, USA can no longer hide but find moral victories. It's been too long doing that. So let's win matches. Let's expect to win matches. Let's demand of the players that they win matches.